CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, at the CHEK News World Headquarters in Victoria. New legislation drops the hammer on housing projects in BC. Municipalities are moving to ban drug use in public places, and BC's Premier wades into the hostile takeover of mining company TECK Resources. Lots more this week. We will bring in the pod squad to talk about it all. Jeff, Jillian, and Allie are here. Thank you, as always, for being here. Jeff, you have been meaning to introduce us to a new piece of artwork for several weeks now. I know after every show you lament that you weren't able to do it. Do you have it ready? Is it ready to go?
I'll have it ready for the podcast. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Describe it for all of our podcast listeners.
Now, if you look behind me, you have the majestic painting by local artist John Ferrier at Pacific Central train station in Vancouver. And today I'd like to unveil the new piece of art, which is this very exciting, smaller version of the same art piece that was done by my colleague Michaela and part of on a flower pot.
That's very nice. So, I like it.
Welcome to the show, little.
You doubled down on your controversial painting.
Too bad, the painting stain.
All right.
It's only getting stronger,
with
multiplying.
That's right.
With that settled, let's go on to our first topic. Premier David Eby's government bringing the hammer down on for the first time on a housing project this week, doing what he has long warned, which is having the provincial government override the local zoning process to get a housing project into reality. In this case, a 13-story, 130-unit supportive housing project in Vancouver that local residents challenged in court, saying it's too close to a school and a women's shelter. The city wanted it built. The province stepped in, is using legislation to cut off the court challenge and push it all through. First time that the government has done this after warning it could do it for months. Why do we think the Premier's doing this, and what does it mean for the future of housing projects? Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Well, on housing affordability, we don't have a situation that's mildly challenging or somewhat demanding or mostly tough. We have a housing crisis, and we need government to use every tool that it's got to get things built. So here you have the Arbutus project, 129 units supportive and affordable housing, stuck in limbo because of a lawsuit launched by opponents, and they're opponents of every housing project. That's the story of BC. People at the local level pushing back against any housing, especially the most needed kind of housing like this, which is for people who are most at risk. I think what we're seeing here is the Premier channeling his Greg Valentine. I don't know if you folks are wrestling fans or know that I'm a wrestling fan, but he's a great wrestler from Seattle, known for his big elbow drops that he calls the hammer. It's lowering the hammer, showing leadership, facing down some powerful and influential political interests, people who can cause him electoral hurt, and not just his party. This is his local constituency, his riding, votes in his community. And he is saying, yeah, this is controversial, but the greater good is that we need to get housing built, and I'm going to lower the hammer, and we're going to make it happen. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we need to get through this housing crisis and things built.
Okay, hammer time, to use what I thought was going to be Jeff's reference, but not quite. But Allie,
can you imagine the material he would need for his pants? Maybe for the hammer time pants.
Those parachute pants are coming back, Jeff. Allie, what do you think? Is it the beginning of what we're going to see in the province, not just this project, but elsewhere, do you think?
Likely, and I hope so. I mean, like Jeff said, this is a show of leadership on a crisis. But what I do see, I think this is the beginning of the conversation. Like, thankfully, the municipality and the provincial government seem to be on the same page. Those in opposition are the community itself. But this is going to become a larger political issue. I think it's not going to go away anytime soon. And the one thing that I think that could fix this is an additional announcement of wraparound support, because the politics behind this proposed project is not the fact that there's housing going in next to transit down the road. Like, those are all really good things. It's the type of housing that's going into the community. So what we're potentially going to see is the NDP playbook of the opposition being opposed to it because it's a class warfare, like not in my backyard, of this very affluent community of Arbutus and Kitsilano. I don't think it's so much that the community doesn't want it there. It's that the community doesn't want that type of housing without the additional support. Right now, the proposed project would just dump people in it without any support, and it's rich with potential issues for the community. There's a women's support center around the corner. There's a school. There's a church. So it's not the housing infrastructure. It's additional support. So my last point there is, if we want to avoid the political partisanship of this conversation, then announce that you're also going to offer that wraparound support and be on the hook for if something goes wrong in this community.
100%. I mean, like, fair enough to the residents there who are watching similar projects in other communities become, minor epicenters for public disorder, and then getting kind of shamed for pointing that out publicly, that things there are problems associated with a level of support in some of these housing projects. Jillian, I think Allie had a good point there, that Vancouver asked the province to intervene here, but next time we might have a situation of the province bigfooting a municipality out of the way, local mayors and councillors and residents, to try and get this done. And are we starting a larger process here the government is politically going to have to defend?
Yeah, totally. I think that is where this issue could become more politically fraught. This project not only has the support of the current mayor, but also the last mayor, and was passed through council. So in some ways, because it's politically controversial, because it's in Eby's riding, and because of just the opposition of residents, but it's also politically safe because the province can say, this has been passed by two mayors. It was, went through the democratic process by going through a vote of council. So I think it's a good, in that regard, a good kind of safe one for them to use this as their first kick at the can with this new power. And yeah, I agree. I think not every local government has as much pressure on them as the Vancouver Council does to pass this kind of housing. It can be a lot more controversial in other communities that haven't, been sort of ground zero of the housing crisis for as long as Vancouver has. So I think it is going to be really interesting to see, and I think that will be the first real test if we see any that where the province and local governments are not on the same side with projects.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in real quick? Folks make good points. I think Allie's right on about the need for wraparound supports. My understanding of Arbutus project is that it is supportive housing. So that would suggest that there are those supports that are going to be available for folks. But let's make sure that those supports are there and the follow through happens so that the housing can be successful and the tenancies can be successful.
Most of this week in the legislature was dominated by the public disorder / crime issue. Again, lots of yelling and shouting from MLAs, maybe even a bit more than usual. But one angle that seemed to pick up steam was the issue of at least two cities, Kamloops and Campbell River, preparing bylaws to ban the use of drugs in public places like parks, playgrounds, and beaches. They say BC's decriminalization project, which started in late January, has made public drug use worse and contributed to some of the issues we are seeing in urban centers. The BC United Party agrees with that. Government does not, and public health officials do not. They're asking the municipalities to not kind of go down this route. But I'm wondering if we're at a municipal tipping point of public sympathy towards both the overdose crisis, the unhoused, and the addictions issues running up against the public fear of disorder and open drug use on the cities. And it seems to be playing out differently municipally than it is provincially. Allie, let's start with you on that. What do you make of all this?
Well, we're in a roller coaster of this whole thing being an experiment, right? We're in that experimental phase of, will this work? Will this not work? I'll say this. There's a municipality in Washington state that's going as far as trying to ban it across city limits. Like, we're not there yet, but we potentially could be. Right now, we're just trying to protect our vulnerable and our children in playgrounds. Like, that's the political argument, is like, let's get drugs off of playgrounds. No one's going to argue with that. I don't think. I sure hope not. But this has the potential to go down a very, very weird road where we're banning it across municipalities.
Mm-hmm. And that pressure on municipalities seems to come from residents who are upset, expressing it through their municipalities, but the province doesn't seem to be maybe picking it up in the same way. Jillian, like I kind of look at this issue, and you've done polling and as part of your career, but I look at it as one of those political sniff test issues. If you went out in the street and asked 10 people, do you think there should be open drug use in playgrounds or parks? Like, most of them, I think, would say no, which makes it a bit harder for government to kind of, criticize the municipalities or urge them not to do this, I guess. But what do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated one, because I think, I agree. Most people would agree, especially the way that the counselor in Kamloops was framing it. You can't drink or smoke in these places, so you shouldn't be able to use drugs either. And I think that is a very, very reasonable. The flip side of it is that the point of decriminalization is to remove stigma, and to, potentially remove sort of criminalization of people who use drugs, so that we can start really addressing it as a public health issue and break down those barriers that stigma presents to people getting help or accessing services. So it's tough because, because that stigma still exists and decriminalization is so new. It's sort of a false equivalence between drinking and drug use, where we do still see the potential for vulnerable people who are using drugs, who are unhoused and don't have anywhere else to go, to be, overly persecuted by law enforcement. I think that there's other things that the province and municipalities could be doing to sort of provide more safe injection sites, provide other venues for people to go, where they can access services and where they can be safe, and where we can kind of make sure that we're limiting other public harm. But it's a tricky one, because you want to make sure that you're addressing people in the community's concerns about safety. As a parent of a young kid, we go to the playground almost every day. I really understand that. But I think at the same time, we can't we need to make sure that we're not sort of removing all of the good things and the reasons why we're doing decriminalization in the first place as well.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point, and health officials have raised it as well, that stigma or banning people who they're going to use, and if they use in a public place and have an overdose, maybe you can save their lives rather than if they are stigmatized off into using alone somewhere and overdosing and not getting help. These are people's family members. It's an overdose crisis that's killed almost 12,000 people since 2016. Like, we have to, just pushing them off out of sight isn't helping anyone, Jeff. But at the same time, if you are at a park with your child and you're seeing needles around and someone having a psychotic episode due to the drugs they're using, you probably have a right to go to your local council and say, that's not cool, and it's not safe for me either, which leads to this kind of yin and yang on the issue.
Sure, it's a complex issue, and you've got competing interests. How do you keep people who use drugs alive at a time when thousands are dying, with respect to the well-meaning counselor's observation that we don't have cigarette smoking in parks? The difference between cigarettes and a syringe is that 5 minutes after you have a cigarette, sometimes you don't die. Right, and that's what's happening. So we're trying to keep people alive. But you're absolutely right that and you want to get those folks into treatment and get better if it's at all possible. But you also want to do it in a way that ensures public spaces are safe for everyone. So I would say to folks who are advocating banning the use of drugs in public spaces is that you have to make spaces available for people to use drugs when they don't have any place else to go. And so if you're going to say that's not in parks and it's not in public spaces, then you need to have the political courage to also say we're going to have more and bigger and more accessible safe injection sites, that do save people's lives, that give people a place to do something they're going to do in a safe place with other people, where if things go wrong, there's someone there to help them. And at the same time, there's people who, that are with, if they're well staffed, point people to places they can go to get help. So, it is a dilemma for local officials. But, if you're going to force people out of parks, they're going to end up in alleyways or in corners alone and die. No one wants that. I'm not suggesting anyone wants that. So make the spaces available. And longer term, poison-free, safe supply of drugs will keep people alive. Detox on demand is really important. It's something that the opposition parties are raising, and I think they're right on about that. And the supportive housing that we were talking about in the segment before, I think that's the solution. And it's a tough one, but
it would be nice to see the health authorities
out of sight is the worst solution.
Yeah, it would be nice to see the health authorities step up a bit more. I know in Campbell River, for example, they're pointing out the limited hours that a supervised consumption site runs. That's a provincial responsibility. In communities that are considering this, maybe the province should come to the table with some money or some additional resources to allow for those to stay open longer. I don't know. It's going to end up being on a city-by-city basis. It looks like right now, Kamloops, Sicamous already passed this bylaw. Kelowna's talking about it. Campbell River is voting on it next week. So it's going to end up being another debate, a very passionate, fiery debate in the legislature this week. On to another issue here. New fundraising numbers out from Elections BC. Usually these things give us a glimpse into how parties are doing. We sift through fundraising for clues on strengths and weaknesses. The NDP raised almost $4 million in 2022. The BC Liberals, now BC United, raised $2.5 million, and the Greens raised around $1 million, almost $90,000 for the BC Conservatives. Is there anything we can take from this? The numbers are around the same for the Greens, a little bump up for the Liberals and or United and NDP from last year. Both had leadership campaigns. The Liberals had a pretty good last quarter. Any of this coalesce into some trends, Jillian, or anything that we can take away from this?
I think it's interesting. Well, first, it's interesting to me that they're all able to sort of keep their numbers up, given the economic conditions and how much we talk about sort of political disengagement. I think it shows that they're all working hard to sort of keep up that support and to stay election ready with that threat constantly on the table. I think that this is probably a bit of relief for the Liberals, but still they're just like a little bit more than half of what the BC NDP is raising. They still have not recovered from the new election finance laws fully to be at that point where they're neck and neck with the NDP. I think they used to even outraise them probably in their big money, and that's challenging when it comes to trying to run a full province-wide election campaign. I think for the Greens, I think it's it's good. This is the second year that's not an election year that they have a leadership contest where they've raised over $1 million. They're still doing good work there. I think the question will be, can they grow when it is an election year and really get to that next level? But with 2 MLAs to raise just shy of half of what the Liberals raised is, I think, pretty good for them. And then I think the NDP machine is still obviously very strong, continuing to raise lots of money and fill its coffers to have a really strong campaign next time.
Mm-hmm. The NDP, a juggernaut, Allie, when it comes to fundraising. The United Party picking up some steam near the end of the year, but what do we make of that?
Yeah, so I mean, the BC United were $100,000 behind the BC NDP in the last quarter of 2022, which is all signaling good news. What's going to happen, I think, in 2023, though, is we have potential by-elections, so there will be an influx of cash there. And the fact that there's more issues right now, I think political parties in the province have kind of been distracted with leadership races and their internal factors, but now we just get to move on to the issues. And so for BC United, we're seeing an uptick when it came to the Better is Possible mental health and addictions plan. people really believed in it so much so that they sent over some money to BC United. After the launch last week, the leader went up to Kelowna and in one day made over $100,000 fundraising there as well. And these are moments of intrigue for people to say, yeah, I need to invest in these political parties again. So 2023 is going to be very interesting because of the by-elections as well. It'll be a nice indicator of when the provincial election comes up, who and where are people going to invest their money.
Mm-hmm. Great point, Jeff. Now there are issues and not leaders to fundraise for and to gauge support for, so that'll make it a different year as well, as Ellie said.
My key takeaways here are that David Eby seems pretty popular. NDP seems pretty popular. They're raising lots of money. Good on them.
Okay. All right. Well,
what else am I going to say? Like the numbers reflect popular support. Parties are all working hard. You would expect that the opposition numbers would come up as you get closer to an election as they gear up. But you look at places like the city of Vancouver, where there was an incumbent mayor and who ran out of money because he wasn't popular and wasn't supported, and that's not happening with the NDP. So it says to me that folks who think that the next election is going to be a repeat of the Vancouver municipal election or so, these numbers suggest that it's going to be something different. That there's enduring resilience in the NDP's brand and support, and the people like the premier and they're putting their money where their feelings are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll watch them. They're one of the clues, along with polling and other things. Not very scientific, but some of the only clues we have on how the parties are sort of resonating with their base and also with others as well. So we will keep on that. That concludes the video version of our show. Thank you so much if you're watching on CHEK TV. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast where we have audio extras every week and extended discussions. And we'll be back next week with all the latest. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to watching. And tune in next week for all the latest here on BC Politics on Political Capital.